The courtroom was alive with energy, a mix of nervous whispers and the rustling of papers filling the air. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the weight of people waiting for their turn to speak. Some clutched documents tightly in their hands, while others stared blankly ahead, lost in thought. The atmosphere was tense, almost electric, as everyone waited for Judge Thomas Harlan to enter the room. Known throughout the city for his strict demeanor and sharp tongue, Judge Harlan commanded respect, or at least fear, from everyone who stepped foot into his courtroom. When he finally walked in, the room fell silent. His heavy footsteps echoed. Against the tiled floors, he took his seat behind the high bench. With a stern expression, he adjusted his robes and scanned the room like a hawk eyeing its prey. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one dared to make a sound. The bailiff called out the first case of the day, and the proceedings began. One by one, individuals approached the stand, presenting their arguments or pleading their innocence, but no matter what they said, Judge Harlan seemed unimpressed. He interrupted frequently, cutting people off mid-sentence with sarcastic remarks that left them flustered and defeated. Amidst this sea of tension sat Maya Johnson, a young black woman with a quiet strength about her. She wore a simple yet neat outfit, a blouse paired with a knee-length skirt, and carried herself with dignity despite the nerves bubbling inside her. Today she had come to contest a parking ticket, something that might seem trivial to some but felt significant to her. It wasn't just about the money, it was about fairness. Maya believed she hadn't violated any rules, and she wanted to set the record straight. As the cases progressed, her name was announced and she rose from her seat, heart pounding. Walking up to the podium, Maya took a deep breath to steady herself. She glanced around the room, noticing how the judge's piercing gaze followed her every move. There was an unmistakable air of authority surrounding him, and it was hard not to feel small under his scrutiny. Still, she reminded herself why she was here. This wasn't just about proving her point. It was about standing up for herself, even if the odds were stacked against her. As Maya began speaking, her voice was calm but firm. She explained the situation clearly, laying out the facts as she saw them. "Your Honor," she started, "I parked my car in a designated area, and I believe there may have been a misunderstanding regarding the signage." Her words were measured, respectful and confident. For a brief moment, she thought she might actually get through to him. But then, Judge Harlan leaned forward slightly, his lips curling into a smirk. Well, he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "It seems we have another expert on parking regulations here today." A few people in the gallery chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. Maya felt her cheeks grow warm, but she didn't break eye contact. Instead, she continued, trying to explain further. However, the judge wasn't interested in hearing more. "Let me stop you right there," he interjected sharply. "Do you really think you know better than the officers who issued the ticket? Or perhaps you believe the rules don't apply to you?" The sting of his words hit Maya like a punch to the gut. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, judging her, pitying her. Part of her wanted to shrink back, to retreat, to her seat and avoid further embarrassment. But another part, the stronger part, refused to give in. She reminded herself that she hadn't done anything wrong. Why should she let someone else's cruelty dictate how she felt about herself? Despite the discomfort swirling inside her, Maya stood tall. She clasped her hands together to keep them from trembling and forced herself to focus. This wasn't the first time she'd faced adversity, after all. Growing up, she'd encountered countless situations where people doubted her abilities or dismissed her because of her race. Yet each time she'd found a way to rise above it. And this moment would be no different. As the judge continued to belittle her, Maya's mind wandered back to her childhood. She remembered sitting at the kitchen table with her father, listening intently as he shared stories of his own struggles. He often told her, "People will try to make you feel small, Maya, but don't ever let them take your voice. You have every right to speak up and fight for what's fair." Those words had stayed with her over the years, guiding her through difficult times and giving her the courage to face challenges head-on. Now, standing in front of Judge Harlan, Maya drew strength from those memories. She knew she couldn't control how he treated her, but she could control how she responded. So instead of crumbling under his harsh words, she chose to remain composed. Her silence wasn't a sign of defeat. It was a deliberate act of resilience. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her crack. Unbeknownst to Maya, however, the tide was about to turn. Just as Judge Harlan leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased with himself, the courtroom doors swung open with a loud creak. Everyone turned to see who had entered, curiosity spreading across their faces. A man hurried inside, clutching a thick folder labeled "Urgent" in bold letters. He whispered urgently to the bailiff, who nodded and quickly handed the folder to the judge. For the first time that day, Judge Harlan's smug expression faltered. He opened the folder, his brow furrowing as he skimmed through its contents. The color drained from his face, replaced by a look of sheer panic. Whatever was written in that document had shaken him to his core. The once confident judge now looked like a cornered animal, glancing around the room as if searching for an escape route. The audience, sensing that something monumental was unfolding, held their collective breath. Maya watched silently, her earlier humiliation giving way to a strange sense of satisfaction. She didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. Justice, in some form, was finally making its presence known. As Maya stood at the podium, her voice steady but laced with determination, Judge Harlan's demeanor quickly shifted from indifference to outright mockery. His lips curled into a sneer as he interrupted her explanation about the parking ticket. "Ah, yes," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Another citizen who seems to think she knows more about traffic laws than the officers enforcing them." A few low chuckles rippled through the courtroom, though they were hesitant, almost forced. People weren't sure whether laughing was appropriate, but the tension in the air made them uneasy. Maya paused, taken aback by his dismissive attitude. She had prepared herself for a serious discussion, not this kind of condescension. Still, she tried to press on. "Your Honor," she began again, her voice unwavering despite the growing knot in her stomach. "I'm only asking for a fair review of the situation. I followed all posted signs and regulations." Before she could finish, Judge Harlan cut her off once more, leaning forward slightly with an exaggerated sigh. "Let's be honest here, Ms. Johnson," he said, emphasizing her last name in a way that felt deliberately cold. "Do you really expect me to believe that someone parked illegally purely out of confusion? Or is it possible that you simply chose to ignore the rules because it was convenient?" The words hit Maya like a slap across the face. She felt her cheeks flush, not just from embarrassment but from anger too. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. The way his tone carried an undercurrent of disdain, as if her very presence in his courtroom was somehow beneath him. She glanced around the room, noticing the curious stares of those seated nearby. Some looked sympathetic, while others avoided making eye contact altogether. For a brief moment, she wondered if she should step down, retreat quietly to her seat and let the matter drop. But something deep inside her refused to give up so easily. Instead, Maya squared her shoulders and took a deep breath. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she replied, her voice calm but firm, "I came here today hoping for fairness. If there's been a misunderstanding, I'd appreciate the chance to clarify it." Judge Harlan raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by her response. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest as though he were entertaining some private joke. "Fairness?" he repeated mockingly. "Ms. Johnson, fairness doesn't mean bending the rules whenever it suits us, and frankly, your insistence otherwise suggests either naivety or deliberate disregard for authority." The courtroom fell, silent after his remark. Even the faint rustling of papers ceased as everyone waited to see how Maya would respond. Would she crumble under his harsh words, or would she find a way to push back against his blatant disrespect? Maya clenched her fists briefly before relaxing them, reminding herself to stay composed. She knew better than to let his comments rattle her completely. After all, she had faced similar attitudes before, not always in courtrooms, but in classrooms, workplaces, and even grocery stores. Each time she had learned to rise above it, drawing strength from the lessons her father had instilled in her years ago. Her father's voice echoed in her mind now. They can judge you based on their biases, Maya, but don't let their opinions define you. Stand tall, speak your truth, and remember you are enough. Those words had carried her through countless challenges, and they helped ground her in this moment. Though Judge Harlan's ridicule stung, she reminded herself that his opinion didn't diminish her worth. Still standing there under his scrutinizing gaze, Maya couldn't help but feel small. The power dynamic in the courtroom was undeniable. Judge Harlan sat high above everyone else, literally and figuratively, commanding attention and demanding obedience. To challenge him directly felt risky, almost impossible. Yet, as she glanced around the room, she noticed something unexpected, a flicker of support in the eyes of a few spectators. One older woman gave her a subtle nod of encouragement, while a young man sitting near the front offered a slight smile. These tiny gestures reassured her that she wasn't entirely alone. Determined to make one final attempt, Maya spoke again. Your Honor, I understand the importance of following rules, and I assure you I have no intention of disregarding them. However, I also believe mistakes happen, and addressing them openly benefits everyone involved. All I'm asking for is an opportunity to explain my side fully. For a moment, Judge Harlan didn't respond. He studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. Then he exhaled sharply and shook his head as if dismissing her argument entirely. Very well, he said dryly. You've made your case, or rather, attempted to. But I must say, Ms. Johnson, your persistence borders on stubbornness. Perhaps next time you'll think twice before contesting decisions made by those entrusted with maintaining order. His words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, suffocating yet impossible to ignore. Maya felt the weight of them pressing down on her, but she refused to show weakness. Instead, she nodded politely and stepped away from the podium, returning to her seat without another word. As she walked back, she could feel the eyes of the entire courtroom on her, some filled with pity, others with admiration. Whatever they thought, she told herself it didn't matter. What mattered was that she hadn't backed down. She had stood her ground even when it felt like the world was against her. But just as Maya settled into her seat, ready to accept whatever ruling the judge handed down, something extraordinary happened. The courtroom doors burst open with a loud creak, startling everyone. A man rushed inside, clutching a folder marked "Urgent" in bold red letters. He whispered urgently to the bailiff, who immediately approached Judge Harlan and handed him the document. For the first time that day, the judge's confident demeanor faltered. He opened the folder, his brow furrowing deeply as he skimmed its contents. Within seconds, his face paled and he froze, staring at the pages as if unable to believe what he was reading. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted instantly. Gone was the smug arrogance that Judge Harlan had displayed moments earlier. In its place was a look of sheer panic, as though he had been caught off guard by something far beyond his control. Maya watched silently, her earlier frustration giving way to a strange sense of satisfaction. Whatever was happening, it was clear that justice, in some form, was finally stepping into the picture. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. As the courtroom buzzed with confusion and anticipation, Maya's thoughts drifted back to her childhood, a time when life was simpler, yet no less challenging. Growing up in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of town, she had learned early that the world wasn't always fair. Her family didn't have much, but they made do with what they had, finding joy in small victories and leaning on each other during tough times. What stood out most about her upbringing, however, was how often she witnessed her parents face prejudice simply because of the color of their skin. Her father, Marcus Johnson, worked tirelessly as a mechanic, fixing cars for people who rarely acknowledged his skill or hard work. Despite the disrespect he sometimes endured, he never let bitterness take root. Instead, he poured his energy into raising Maya and her younger brother, teaching them valuable lessons about resilience and self-worth. "You'll meet people who think they're better than you," he would say, wiping grease-stained hands on a rag after a long day at work. "But don't ever let them make you doubt yourself. You are just as good, if not better, than anyone else." Maya remembered one particular incident vividly. She was 10 years old, standing beside her father at the local hardware store while he tried to return a defective tool. The clerk behind the counter barely glanced at him, dismissing his request with a wave of his hand. "Sorry, sir," the clerk said dismissively, "but we don't accept returns without a receipt." Her father calmly explained that he had lost the receipt, but assured the clerk that the item was purchased there. Still, the man refused to budge, treating Marcus like an inconvenience rather than a customer. Frustrated but composed, Marcus turned to Maya and whispered, "Watch this." He then asked politely if the manager could be called. When the manager arrived, Marcus presented his case clearly and respectfully, refusing to raise his voice even as the clerk rolled his eyes. Eventually, the manager agreed to honor the return, though not without some reluctance. As they left the store, Maya looked up at her father, admiration shining in her eyes. "How did you stay so calm?" she asked. Marcus smiled down at her. "Because getting angry wouldn't have changed anything. Sometimes people will try to make you feel small, Maya. But remember, your size isn't measured by what others think of you. It's measured by how you carry yourself. Stand tall, speak your truth, and never let anyone take your dignity away." Those words stayed with Maya throughout her life, shaping the way she navigated the world. Whether it was dealing with teachers who underestimated her abilities in school, or facing employers who overlooked her qualifications, she carried her father's advice close to her heart. It wasn't easy. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed, moments when the weight of systemic bias felt unbearable. But every time she wanted to give up, she reminded herself of her father's quiet strength and unwavering belief in fairness. Now, sitting in the courtroom, watching Judge Harlan's arrogant demeanor crumble before her eyes, Maya couldn't help but reflect on those lessons. The judge's earlier mockery had stung deeply, cutting through her resolve like a sharp knife. Yet instead of retreating into silence or allowing his words to define her, she had chosen to stand firm. And now, seeing him visibly shaken by whatever was written in that urgent folder, she realized something profound. Justice might be delayed, but it was rarely denied. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. For years, Judge Harlan had wielded his power over others, using intimidation and ridicule to assert dominance. Now he sat frozen in his chair, staring at the document as if it were a mirror reflecting all the wrongs he had committed. Maya wondered what secrets lay within those pages. Whatever it was clear that it had struck a nerve. The once confident judge now looked like a cornered animal, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. As the bailiff quietly conferred with another court official, whispers spread through the gallery. People leaned toward each other, speculating about what could have caused such a dramatic shift in the proceedings. Some suggested it might be evidence of misconduct. Others guessed it could be related to a pending investigation. No one knew for sure, but everyone agreed on one thing. Something big was unfolding right before their eyes. Maya watched silently, her emotions a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Part of her wanted to celebrate the sudden turn of events, to revel in the fact that the man who had mocked her mere minutes ago was now visibly rattled. But another part of her felt conflicted. She hadn't come to the courtroom seeking revenge or vindication against Judge Harlan. She had simply wanted fairness. Now, seeing him brought low by circumstances beyond her control, she found herself grappling with mixed feelings. Her mind wandered back to her father once more. If he were here today, what would he say? Would he encourage her to feel triumphant, knowing that karma had finally caught up with someone who had abused his power? Or would he remind her to remain humble, focusing on the bigger picture rather than personal victories? Maya liked to think it would be the latter. Her father had always emphasized the importance of rising above negativity, choosing compassion over bitterness whenever possible. Still, she couldn't deny the sense of validation washing over her. For so long, she had carried the burden of being judged, not just by authority figures like Judge Harlan, but by society at large. Being black in a world that often equated privilege with whiteness meant constantly proving herself, fighting against stereotypes, and navigating systems designed to keep her at a disadvantage. Today, however, something remarkable was happening. The tables had turned, and for the first time in a long time, Maya felt seen. not as a statistic or a stereotype, but as a human being deserving of respect. As the courtroom waited for the next move, Maya allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought about all the times she had been underestimated, dismissed, or outright ridiculed. Each experience had chipped away at her confidence, forcing her to dig deeper and find strength she didn't know she possessed. But those same experiences had also taught her the value of perseverance, resilience, and grace under pressure. They had shaped her into the woman she was today, a woman who refused to let anyone dim her light. The sound of shuffling papers snapped her back to reality. Judge Harlan had finally set the folder aside, though his hands trembled slightly as he did so. His usual authoritative presence was gone, replaced by an air of vulnerability that seemed almost foreign in the courtroom. For the first time, Maya saw him not as a symbol of oppression, but as a flawed human being, one whose actions had consequences, just like everyone else's. Though she couldn't predict what would happen next, Maya felt a renewed sense of hope. Justice, it seemed, had a way of finding its own path even when the road was rocky and uncertain. And as she sat there, surrounded by strangers who had become silent witnesses to this unexpected drama, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the tide was finally turning. The courtroom, which had been tense and silent just moments ago, erupted into a flurry of whispers as the mysterious man hurried inside, clutching the folder marked "Urgent." Everyone turned their heads to see who this newcomer was, and why. He looked so frantic. The bailiff quickly intercepted him at the door, and the two exchanged hushed words that no one else could hear. Whatever they discussed caused the bailiff's expression to shift from curiosity to seriousness. Without hesitation, he approached Judge Harlan and handed over the folder. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. All eyes were fixed on the judge as he opened the folder and began reading its contents. His initial confidence, the air of superiority he carried throughout the session, vanished almost instantly. At first, his eyebrows furrowed in confusion, as though he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then, his face paled, his usual ruddy complexion drained of color until he looked like a ghost sitting behind the bench. He flipped through the pages, his hands trembling slightly, his lips parted as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Maya watched silently from her seat, her earlier frustration giving way to astonishment. She didn't know what was written in that folder, but it was clear that it had shaken Judge Harlan to his core. Gone was the smug, condescending man who had mocked her only moments before. In his place sat someone visibly shaken, struggling to maintain even a shred of composure. For the first time that day, Maya felt a flicker of satisfaction. Not because she wished harm upon him, but because it seemed justice was finally stepping into the picture. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically. People leaned forward, in their seats, craning their necks to get a better view of what was happening. Some whispered theories to each other, speculating about the contents of the folder. Was it evidence of wrongdoing? A legal complaint? Or perhaps an investigation into misconduct? No one knew for sure, but the tension was palpable. Even the bailiff, usually stoic and unflappable, appeared uneasy, glancing nervously between the judge and the mysterious man who had delivered the document. Judge Harlan tried to regain control of the situation. He cleared his throat loudly, attempting to project authority, but his voice cracked under the weight of his obvious distress. This is highly irregular," he stammered, addressing the bailiff rather than the court. "Who authorized this interruption?" The bailiff hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Your Honor, I was instructed to deliver this immediately. It comes directly from the district attorney's office." A murmur rippled through the gallery at the mention of the district attorney. That name carried significant weight. It meant whatever was unfolding wasn't just some minor procedural hiccup. It was serious business. Judge Harlan's jaw tightened, and he gripped the edges of the folder tightly, as if trying to steady himself. For several long seconds he said nothing, staring down at the papers in front of him as if hoping they would somehow disappear. Finally, he looked up, scanning the room with wide, panicked eyes. "Court is adjourned temporarily," he announced abruptly, his voice lacking its usual command. Before anyone could react, he rose from his seat and disappeared into his chambers, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. The courtroom erupted into chaos. People began talking animatedly, sharing their thoughts and guesses about what had just happened. Some praised Maya silently, believing her presence might have triggered the sudden turn of events. Others speculated wildly, throwing out theories ranging from corruption scandals to personal vendettas. Amidst the commotion, Maya remained seated, her mind racing as she tried to piece together what she had witnessed. She thought back to the Yao judge's earlier behavior, the dismissive tone, the mocking remarks, the blatant disrespect, and wondered how many others had suffered similar treatment at his hands. How many people had walked away feeling belittled, powerless, or defeated because of his arrogance. And now, here he was, undone by something so urgent that it couldn't wait another minute. It was poetic, in a way, a reminder that no one, not even someone as seemingly untouchable as Judge Harlan, was above accountability. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, unsure whether to stay or leave, the mysterious man who had delivered the folder lingered near the front of the room. He glanced around cautiously, as if gauging the reaction of those present. When his gaze landed on Maya, he hesitated for a moment before approaching her. "Excuse me, miss," he said quietly, drawing her attention. "Are you Maya Johnson?" Maya nodded, surprised by the question. "Yes, that's me, why?" The man offered a small, tight-lipped smile. "I'm not at liberty to discuss details, but I want you to know that your case today may have played a role in bringing certain issues to light. Things are complicated, but rest assured, steps are being taken to address them." Before Maya could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing through the same doors he had entered. His words left her stunned. What did he mean by bringing certain issues to light? Had her parking ticket hearing inadvertently uncovered something much larger? The idea was both thrilling and overwhelming, filling her with a mix of emotions she couldn't quite sort through. Sitting there alone, Maya replayed the events of the day in her mind. From the humiliating encounter with Judge Harlan to the unexpected twist that followed, everything felt surreal, like a scene from a movie rather than real life. Yet, despite the whirlwind of uncertainty, one thing was clear. Justice, though often delayed, had a way of finding its path. Whether by coincidence or design, the very system that had sought to silence her was now holding itself accountable. Her father's voice echoed in her thoughts once more. "Sometimes, Maya, life gives you signs. Pay attention to them. They'll guide you when you need it most." Today, she realized, was one of those moments. The events unfolding before her weren't just about her individual struggle. They represented a broader reckoning, a reminder that fairness and integrity mattered, even in places where power often overshadowed principle. As the courtroom gradually emptied, Maya gathered her belongings and stood up. Her heart was heavy yet hopeful, burdened by the weight of what she had witnessed but buoyed by the promise of change. Whatever the future held, she knew one thing for certain. She would continue to stand tall, speak her truth, and fight for what was right. Because in the end, justice wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about creating a world where everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, could be treated with dignity and respect. The courtroom, once alive with tension and murmurs, now felt eerily quiet despite the lingering buzz of unanswered questions. People lingered hesitantly, unsure whether to leave or stay and see what would happen next. Maya stood near her seat, clutching her bag tightly in her hands as she tried to process everything that had unfolded. The sudden turn of events left her feeling both vindicated and overwhelmed. She replayed the mysterious man's cryptic words over and over in her mind. "Your case today may have played a role in bringing certain issues to light." What did it mean? How could something as simple as contesting a parking ticket lead to such dramatic consequences? As if on cue, the door to Judge Harlan's chambers swung open again, and he emerged looking even more disheveled than before. His usual polished demeanor was gone. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly unkempt, and there was an unmistakable heaviness in his movements, He avoided making eye contact with anyone as he took slow, deliberate steps back toward the bench. When he finally sat down, his shoulders slumped and his expression was one of resignation rather than authority. The bailiff called for order, though it wasn't really necessary. The room had already fallen silent, everyone watching intently to see what Judge Harlan would do next. For several moments he stared blankly at the papers spread out before him, as if searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally he cleared his throat, a sound so strained it seemed to echo unnaturally in the quiet space, and addressed the court. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, this session will conclude prematurely. All pending cases will be rescheduled at a later date." His announcement sent ripples of surprise through the gallery. Normally, adjourning court without resolving matters was unheard of. It went against every principle of efficiency and fairness that judges like Harlan prided themselves on upholding. But today, nothing about the situation was normal. Before anyone could protest or ask for clarification, 2 uniformed officers entered the courtroom, their presence commanding immediate attention. One of them stepped forward and spoke directly to Judge Harlan. "Your Honor, we need you to accompany us to the district attorney's office. There are matters requiring your immediate attention." The judge's face turned ashen. He opened his mouth as if to argue but quickly closed it again, realizing resistance would be futile. Slowly, almost robotically, he gathered his belongings and followed the officers out of the room. As they exited, whispers erupted once more among the spectators. Some expressed shock, others outrage, and a few even cheered quietly under their breath. It was clear that whatever had transpired, Judge Harlan's reputation and perhaps his career was in jeopardy. Maya watched silently, her emotions a tangled web of satisfaction, disbelief, and cautious optimism. On one hand, she couldn't deny the sense of justice being served. The same man who had mocked her, dismissed her concerns, and treated her with blatant disrespect was now facing accountability for actions far greater than rudeness in court. Yet on the other hand, she couldn't shake the weight of what she had witnessed. Seeing someone in power crumble so suddenly reminded her of how fragile authority truly was, and how easily it could be abused. Her thoughts drifted back to her father's lessons once more. Growing up, he had always emphasized the importance of integrity, not just in personal relationships but also in positions of leadership. When people are given power, he used to say, they have 2 choices. Use it to lift others up or tear them down. The ones who choose the latter rarely escape the consequences of their actions. Today, those words rang truer than ever. Judge Harlan's fall from grace wasn't just about karma catching up to him. It was about exposing the flaws in a system that allowed arrogance and prejudice to go unchecked for so long. As the courtroom gradually emptied, Maya lingered behind, lost in thought. A young woman seated nearby approached her cautiously, offering a warm smile. "You handled yourself with so much dignity today," the stranger said softly. "I don't know exactly what's going on, but I hope you realize how inspiring you were." Maya blinked, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you," she replied, her voice tinged with humility. "Honestly, I didn't expect any of this to happen. I just wanted to stand up for myself." "And you did," the woman continued. "That takes courage. Whatever comes next, don't lose sight of that." Her words stayed with Maya long after the woman walked away. Courage. That was something Maya hadn't considered while standing in front of Judge Harlan. At the time, she had simply been focused on staying composed and refusing to let his mockery break her spirit. But now, reflecting on the day's events, she realized that courage wasn't just about facing fear. It was about doing so openly, honestly, and without apology. It was about holding on to your values even when the world tried to push you off course. Eventually, Maya made her way outside, where the late afternoon sun bathed the city streets in golden light. The contrast between the warmth of the day and the cold reality of what had happened inside the courthouse struck her deeply. She pulled out her phone and dialed her mother's number, needing to share the surreal experience with someone who understood her journey. "Mom, You won't believe. What happened today? Maya began, her voice trembling slightly. Over the next few minutes, she recounted the entire ordeal, the mocking, the humiliation, the mysterious folder, and Judge Harlan's abrupt departure. Her mother listened patiently, interjecting only to gasp or express disbelief. By the end of the story, her tone shifted to one of pride. "Baby, I'm so proud of you," her mother said firmly. "This isn't just about you anymore. It's about showing the world that no one is above accountability. You stood tall, and look what happened. Justice found its way." Hearing her mother's words brought tears to Maya's eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of gratitude. Gratitude for the support system that had shaped her, for the lessons that had prepared her, and for the resilience that had carried her through. Despite the challenges she had faced, she knew she wasn't alone. There were countless others who had walked similar paths, fighting for fairness in a world that often seemed determined to deny it. Later that evening, as Maya scrolled through social media, she noticed posts about the courtroom incident starting to circulate online. Someone had recorded part of the hearing and uploaded it, sparking discussions about bias within the legal system. Commenters praised Maya's composure and condemned Judge Harlan's behavior, calling for investigations into his conduct. While she hadn't sought publicity, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of validation knowing that her experience resonated with others. It wasn't just her fight anymore, it was a collective call for change. That night, as she lay in bed, Maya reflected on the day's events and the road ahead. She knew that the battle for justice was far from over. Systems built on inequality couldn't be dismantled overnight, and there would undoubtedly be more hurdles to face. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Hopeful that standing up for herself had sparked something bigger. Hopeful that her voice, along with countless others, could create lasting change. Before drifting off to sleep, Maya whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not just for the day's outcome, but for the strength to keep pushing forward. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready to face them head on. After all, justice might take time, but it never gave up, and neither would she.